Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hub Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Hubbard. We have an exciting episode today about entrepreneurship through acquisition and owning and optimizing your career. Our guest this episode is Matt Phillips. Matt was in the MBA class before mine. He shares with us his insights on what it is like owning a business and how to be strategic in one's life choices and career. Let's get started. All right, Matt, thanks. Thanks for coming on the Hub. We're excited to have you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
I think what would be helpful for our listeners, especially as if they were to look you up on LinkedIn or, if they know you personally, a lot of people might see your career and say, wow, he's had some really, he's had some jobs that, a lot of other people would have killed for, or he's had experiences that other people are kind of like, man, why would you leave that? So I think maybe that's where I'd like to start is maybe could you walk us through starting from your MBA, I guess what are those jobs that you've had that are kind of more high profile and why did you end up leaving them? Just so, our listeners can kind of get a feel for what you think about as you've gone from place to place.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've candidly, there's been times where I've looked back at my career and been like, have I jumped around too much? Should I have stayed put a little bit more? And so I will say that there have definitely been times where I've questioned my own decision making on that. But I think it really has been kind of an exercise in trying to figure out what is important to me in my career and in my life. So post MBA, I went to Boston Consulting Group up in Calgary, Canada, working in the oil and gas industry, and had a phenomenal experience there. And when I made the decision to go to BCG, I think I was really optimizing for having a really solid brand stamp kind of resume building type job. My pre-MBA job was at a very small startup. I feel like I had great experiences there, but no one had ever heard of the startup. It didn't IPO and become some giant thing. So I kind of questioned whether I had that brand stamp. And so I think the BCG experience was going for that for me. And also the training that I knew I would get, and then I felt like I did get at BCG of how to structure problems, how to just think about a business holistically was something I really wanted to get out of that experience. So as I was at BCG for a little under 2 years, and what really made me decide to leave consulting, I would say it was a combination of three things. The first was I felt like I wasn't close enough to the action and the implementation of the stuff I was working on to feel satisfied. You'd work really hard on a strategy, a presentation, go present it, and then at times it would sit on the shelf and not get implemented, or you wouldn't be around to see the implementation to see if it worked. And that was tough from a fulfillment perspective of not feeling like my work had the impact that I commensurate to the effort level that I put into it. So that was the first thing. The second thing was I really struggled at times with the consultant client dynamic. I'm used to being on teams that are really strong and love coming to work every day and working with the people that are on your team. But I always felt like in consulting, particularly at the beginning of a project, you really had to gain the trust of your client. And they felt like, that's kind of a hard thing to do. Sometimes you're in a little bit of an adversarial spot where the client's like, well, why are you here? Is it because I couldn't do my job right? Now you're coming in to replace me. So there was always that little bit of tension, which with certain clients, you got over that pretty quickly and moved to a spot where it was really great. Uh, but other times it didn't happen so quickly, and you're kind of walking on eggshells for a lot of time, which it's not a spot I prefer to be. Um, and then also, this is something I knew going into consulting, but the work-life balance was definitely a challenge. And there were times where I'm like, am I putting in too much here and getting out too little from a family and kind of personal perspective? So that definitely played into it. So that was kind of the why I went into BCG, why I decided to leave, and then I went to Chatbooks from there. So I can talk about that transition as well.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the consulting. One for listeners, BCG is like one of the top three management consulting firms out there. And it is a good point with consulting. It's sometimes I wouldn't say it feels like a theoretical exercise, but
Uh,
not being around for the execution and the implementation, it does kind of feel a little like, I don't want to say the project's half done, but it's kind of like, oh, hey, this is great idea. This is, great theory, good strategy, whatnot. But unless it's executed, it's hard to know if it would actually work.
right. Yeah, implementation is really where the rubber meets the road.
That's true. Yeah. So after BCG, you decide to come back to Utah and work for Chatbooks. Maybe could you walk us through that transition and you know
Yeah.
I mean, you're not really trading cold weather for warm weather per se. So what's the what was the drive?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say it was definitely a combination of like career-based decisions and personal-based decisions on that one. So um, I think the biggest career-based decision there was at BCG in Calgary. I was getting a lot of exposure to the oil and gas industry, which was very cool, something that I'd never worked in before. And by virtue of being in that city, I was kind of, becoming somewhat of an expert in that realm, although I wouldn't claim to be any. My expertise did not reach the level of anyone that I worked with. But I just kind of felt like that wasn't where I wanted my career to specialize from an industry perspective. So I decided that, I want to get back into more of the Utah tech scene. Kind of, I'm from Utah, my wife's from Utah, so there was definitely a personal draw to come back and be closer to home. My role at BCG, I was still a ways away from being a manager. Like I had about 9 months until I was going to be promoted to a manager role. And I just felt like I wanted to get more management experience and lead a team and kind of develop that skill set more quickly. So actually was reached out to by some former BYU MBAs that were at Chatbooks, and they were looking to fill a director of strategy and analytics role, which felt like right up my alley, kind of the strategy side from my time at BCG. And then prior to my MBA, I did a lot with data and analytics. And the culture at Chatbooks is just a phenomenal culture, fantastic team. So it kind of was almost, I would say that in some ways, a direct opposite of what I was doing in consulting. Fantastic work-life balance in the, e-commerce, tech, Utah space as opposed to oil and gas. And I was leading a team and really focused on helping elevate that team. And part of the mandate that I was given from the CEO of Chatbooks when I came in was, hey, we want to help our strategy and analytics team become, similar to BCG consultants, so they can help our internal team think through problems,
Right.
answer questions, implement. So that was a fun and exciting challenge to me. So that's why I made the jump to Chatbooks and had a phenomenal experience there. Um, Again, I was there for about a year and a half, had some great experiences, and the driver for me in leaving Chatbooks was more, I would say, motivated by I think the financial side of what I was investing in. or how I was investing my time kind of long term. So, just in general, I was making a good salary kind of, for the experience I'd had. And I would say my equity level was probably on par with what someone would get joining a B stage or a Series B stage startup company, after they've been around for a number of years. So I was grateful to have equity in the company, but as I looked kind of long term at what the value of that would be, it was exciting, but not didn't have the wealth creation potential that I that I was looking
wasn't
for.
rewarding enough. Yeah, totally. No,
Yeah,
makes sense. Makes sense. You want to invest. You want to have long term payoff as well, if you're
yeah.
working hard.
So when I was making the decision to leave Chatbooks, my two things that I was optimizing for were I want to be in a position where I am one or one of the top decision makers and leaders of a company, and I also want to have significant equity in the company so that if things go well and if all the effort I put in yields the result we're hoping for, that there's a sizable financial outcome at the end of it. So um, it was just, I definitely made some trade-offs, like definitely work-life balance got worse than what I had at Chatbooks. I actually decided that it was worth taking a pretty significant pay cut in salary to be able to get a bigger chunk of equity. But I was able to get in a spot where I do have larger equity and
Yeah. So what you're saying is maybe took a little um, short term cut in terms of payoff salary, but from a long term perspective, the work that you're doing is more aligned with hopefully your long term payoff. Is that correct?
exactly. Yeah, I think that was probably like the main driver of the decision. So, wanting to find something where I kind of thought about it like I want to be in a game that's worth winning. If things go super well, I want there to be, a sizable financial outcome at the end. Um, where when I was at Chatbooks, like I kind of felt like we could do really, really well. We could achieve a lot of our goals, but personally, I may not see, as much benefit there. So decided to look for something that would give me that opportunity if things went well.
Totally makes sense. So I think some of our listeners might not be clear to them what exactly you're doing and how you got there. So maybe
Yep.
if you could talk about, and I don't know, for lack of a better term, the private equity group that's backing you. Maybe just that relationship, how it works, and kind of how you got into the position you're in. I guess
Yep.
and clarify like, okay, what position are you in?
Yep. Totally. So the position that I hold today is I am the COO of a electric sign manufacturing company, and I'm also a board member at that company. And I also sit on the board of a packaging manufacturing company, both based in Utah. Um, so my my operating role, like I said, is in kind of the production and operations side of the sign company. But at a higher level, I'm one of three partners that are the main partners over what we call our business to business manufacturing platform company. So, sign manufacturing, packaging manufacturing, that's kind of the area we're focusing on. And I have two phenomenal partners that actually decided to let me kind of join in with them. They were already about a year down this path of having acquired these two companies, and we're at the stage where they were looking to bring on another partner to have both an operational role and kind of a long-term equity stake in both of these companies. Um, and between the three of us, we put a lot of day-to-day operational effort into helping these companies grow. And the long-term play here is that we help these companies become more scalable and then eventually do some acquisitions in similar spaces. So buy additional signage companies, buy additional packaging companies, and kind of follow the roll-up model where we're buying companies in the same space that have similar customer bases, similar product lines, and create an entity through organic growth and through acquisition that is much larger than the sum of the pieces that were acquired. Um, so one level up from that, so there's me and these two other guys who are the three partners in this manufacturing platform company. Um, we are all kind of, I would say, part of a group called Tenzing Partners. So Tenzing Partners, the easiest way to describe it is as a private equity firm, but it's actually a little bit different than that. A traditional private equity firm will raise money from outside investors and have certain funds where they invest from those funds, and then they expect within a certain time frame, maybe 10 years, to have those investments be exited and get a payout from that. Tenzing Partners is, I would say, a little bit more of like a structure and framework around the entrepreneurship through acquisition model, where the more senior members of the Tenzing group have done entrepreneurship through acquisition, where they've gone out and bought a company, helped it grow, added scalability, done more acquisitions to create a larger entity. And they have decided that a good model to continue and perpetuate entrepreneurship through acquisition is to do it kind of under the umbrella of a larger partnership that can support each other, provide capital when needed, provide expertise, and then provide some of the back office functions that are helpful for taking over a previously maybe smaller mom and pop style company, where you can get some economies of scale of having support around legal, finance and accounting, HR, so that the operator who has acquired a business can focus on employees, revenue growth, and get some support in some of the more back office functions. So anything I can clarify about that?
No, I think that was great. I think that was clear. And just for my understanding, just to make sure I know. So it's essentially, I don't want to say outsourcing, but centralizing all the like back office, I don't want to say administrative type stuff, but a
Uh-huh.
lot of the stuff that is, HR at one company in terms of hiring, promotion, firing, that kind of stuff is pretty replicable at other companies. I guess I'm speaking generally here.
Yeah.
And if you can centralize it, have a system put up in place, then that just leaves the company to focus, like you were saying, on revenue growth and the employees and making sure things operate smoothly there. So
Yeah.
there's a kind of a central hub that does all the overhead overhead functions, and then each individual unit or each individual company can just do what they do best.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not as hard and fast as like, okay, the moment that a new company is acquired, they go onto this Tenzing back office platform, although that is an option. And um, yeah, so some companies actually have their HR and finance and accounting really well situated already. So it doesn't make as much sense to transition them onto the Tenzing back office platform. But others, need more help, and it's great to be able to outsource it to people our, within our umbrella of Tenzing, and that have that experience and can help kind of immediately add value of, okay, this is how you should set up your HR processes and stay compliant. This is how you should be running your accounting software. So it's typically the stuff that is replicable, that's kind of more like particularly in HR, more compliance based stuff, to just make sure that we're doing things correctly so we can focus on the growth and employee development and hiring, the right people, getting the right people in the right seats.
Yeah, makes sense. And it's probably more fun for the operator themselves too, right? To hey, I don't have to spend time, reading through
Right.
local hiring regulations. I can focus on, hey, what does
Yep.
this customer need, or hey, what can we do to help motivate this employee?
Exactly.
That's great. Question for you, and if you're comfortable sharing, that's great. If you're not, totally fine. Uh, a listener might be hearing this and saying, okay, well, how does what is the incentive structure look like for you coming in as an owner operator? Like, are you
Yeah.
getting 20% of the business, 50% of the business? Like, and then how much did you have to, take a lean out on your home? If you're
Right.
comfortable sharing, high level,
Yeah.
what does the economics kind of look like for someone who's saying, hey, I could be an owner operator. Like, I could get, how does it work for someone kind of wanting to step in that role?
Yeah. So I'll speak kind of high level of how the Tenzing model works. And my situation is slightly different because I joined a little bit later in the process of the B2B manufacturing platform company. So, but in general, the idea is, or at least in the past, Tenzing has brought in partners that are, I would say, earlier in their career. And so the way so I think it all comes down to like the risk reward profile, like how much risk are you willing to take, and based on that, how much equity uh, do you get. So the typical Tenzing model would be trying to get as much seller financing as possible to when buying a company, to try to reduce the amount of capital needed up front to make a business acquisition. So, that's obviously part of the negotiation with any seller. They would typically prefer to have all cash up front so they can go take that money and go do something else with it. But
Head to the
often,
Bahamas? No.
yeah, but oftentimes they're willing to take a deal where there is some seller financing over time, where maybe they get a smaller amount of cash up front and then they get a higher purchase price, but that's paid out over time in a seller financing note. So Tenzing definitely focuses on that kind of like long-term partnership and uh, working closely with the seller and making sure that the business continues to run uh, and maintain that legacy. So a lot of times the seller's willing to take on a seller financing note. And then the second kind of piece of structuring a deal would typically be an SBA loan. So that's where an operating partner like myself is able to take on that risk in personally guaranteeing the finance or the SBA note, and therefore taking that risk and justifying the equity upside commensurate with the risk that's being taken. And then in general, if there is additional capital that needs to be put in, the partnership or the operating partner, will figure out a way to kind of come up with the cash that needs to go into the deal. So it really varies based on the deal, the number of partners that are involved. But at a high level, for being willing to take out the SBA loan, particularly if there's a large seller note, an operating partner in this situation could, get somewhere between 20%, maybe up to 50% of the company. And then, the Tenzing type group or the kind of the backing group would get the remaining equity for helping structure the deal, putting in capital, kind of sitting on the board and helping an operator who maybe is recently out of MBA and has lots of energy and some
Enthusiasm.
great
Yep.
experience, but also having the support of those who have been in it 15, 20, 25 years and gone through the ringer with other companies. So as I mentioned before as well, the nice thing about the structure that I've got set up with my partners is I do draw a salary from the company that I'm working for. So I'm technically an employee of the signed company, drawing a salary like other employees of that company. But I also have the equity piece, and when the company's doing well and we're able to take distributions from the company, there is that uh, supplemental income along the way of getting ownership distributions based on your equity percentage, which is kind of like a mini payout as you go
Right.
before final exit of the company.
No, makes sense. A dividend payout that's not doesn't always get paid out quarterly or 6 months or whatever it is. How the company is doing,
Yep.
then you pay out. One kind of just quick question I had: when the, for lack of a better term, the private equity group, when they buy these companies, how often is it that the company needs an extra cash infusion? Uh, Does that make sense? You buy the company,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, actually, this needs, an extra million or $500,000 just to kind of get the ship settled and, then we can
Yeah.
go off running.
Yeah. That's a great question. So typically in a purchase like this, a big part of it is, especially in a manufacturing business, is figuring out who owns the inventory of the company. Because there is a lot of working capital of like, okay, we have $500,000 of raw materials that are eventually going to be used to produce product. And, the seller has a lot of money tied up in that. So they want to make sure that they get fairly compensated for leaving that inventory as part of the company so that the company continue to run. So I would say that's often an important discussion of like figuring out what the working capital in the business is at the time of purchase and making sure that that's appropriately reflected in the purchase. And then as far as additional cash infusion, at least in my experience, we've kind of taken the approach of let's go in, understand the business, figure out what are the quick wins that we can make some changes to that will help improve the business. And then typically a cash infusion would be if you want to invest in significantly growing the team or in new equipment or new opportunities that require some upfront capital. Like in both of our businesses, there are equipment purchases that could help us enter new markets or provide different services that we've had to debate. Like, okay, is it worth spending an extra $250,000 on this machine, or do we want to keep that cash flow in the business as a reserve? Do we want to keep that cash as a potential kind of equity infusion for a future acquisition? So I would say typically the hope is that once you purchase a business, there's not a bunch of additional cash immediately needed, but more a little bit down the line as you understand the business and kind of really assess where your opportunities are. Then maybe a year or two down the road, you can make a more educated decision about what's the best use of any additional capital coming into the business, whether that's employees, further acquisitions, equipment, or other ways to build the business.
What has been the biggest surprise for you coming into this role?
Yeah, great question. So I would say I have been surprised about the complexity of learning a new business, a new industry. And maybe that's a little bit of the the hubris of being a consultant, where it's like, oh yeah, you go in for a week or two, you figure out a company, you can solve the problems pretty quick. Um, but I've been in. So I came into the packaging company first and led the sales team there, and then after about 9 months there, as a partnership, we felt like it would be helpful for me to jump over and start running operations at the signage company. So I've kind of in the last year and a half, I've gone through this process twice of learning a new business, learning a new industry, trying to understand terminology and who the different players are. Um, and it's not, it's one thing to do that for like a case, in the MBA program or a short case in a consulting firm. But to get in and actually be an operator that has to like talk to employees each day and talk to them about what their priorities should be and how we can do things better. Like there needs to be a deep understanding of the business and the
Yeah.
industry and how everything works to gain that credibility as a new owner and operator in the business. And that just takes time. And, I think I was hoping it would go a little faster, but I'm still learning a ton every day. So I think that's probably one of my biggest surprises.
This is where the rubber meets the road, right? This is the
Yeah.
implementation that that was
Yes.
maybe lacking at
Exactly.
BCG.
Exactly.
Well, conversely, what would you say the biggest satisfaction has been so far? I mean, you've been in this role for about a year now, or with this group for about a year, or less than a
Yeah.
year, or a year
Yeah.
and a half? No.
Yeah. It's been a little bit over a year. Um, from a satisfaction perspective, I would say finding that group of partners that you just really enjoy being in the trenches with. And, sometimes things are great and they're going well. Sometimes, things are really challenging and you're like pulling your hair out and you're questioning, like, why did I leave that awesome job at Chatbooks where I had really good work-life balance and I got home at 5 every day. Um, but like having that group of partners that you can rely on emotionally and rely on their experience and just feel like you've got a really solid group of people that you can be running this race with, I think is to me the biggest point of satisfaction thus far.
That's well said. It's helpful to know you're not in this alone, right? You got some
Yeah.
other people. Matt, that was great. Here, thanks again for, wrapping up. Thanks again for coming on the hub and coming on the podcast. I guess, is there any other comments or any other thoughts that you'd like to share?
Um, I think just generally, like you kind of hear from my experience that I have definitely optimized for different things with the different career steps I've made. And it's really kind of hard to know what you want to be optimizing for in the roles you take. But it's definitely an exercise worth going through of like, you know, do I really want, do I want like work life balance and a good family life now? And like, that's one end of, or that's one very valid thing to optimize for versus do I want to optimize for wealth creation long term that's going to take some sacrifices both financially and time now to put myself in a position where I could have this large upside. But just thinking about those different trade-offs that you're making in your career decision, I think is a really valuable exercise. And then the corollary to that is if you are married, if you have children, being on the same page with those people that are really important in your life about what choices you're making is really really important because I've found in my experience that um, you know me choosing to go down this path has been the topic of some strained conversations with my wife. um, but we were
We're
very
gonna
on
get
this.
paid what? No.
Yeah, exactly. So you're taking this giant pay cut and I don't see you during the week very much anymore and you're super stressed and why are we doing this again? um, so being on the same page about what realistically your life's going to look like if you take path A versus path B, and what are some of the struggles you're likely going to face, and just being on board together with that decision is really, really important. So,
Well, especially something as unique or one off as buying a company, right? You're not always sure what, uh, I don't want to say skeletons are in the closet, but
right.
how it's actually going to turn out when you actually show up to work that first day and you have to interact with employees who've been working there for you
Yeah.
know a while.
Yeah. And for those who are considering this type of route, like the risk that you take on in taking on a personal guarantee on an SBA loan is very legitimate. So that's, I mean, a personal guarantee means that if you can't make the payment on that company, that you're guaranteeing it with your personal assets. So your house, your car, your bank account. Um, so there's a sizable amount of risk there that adds a lot of stress to that decision, especially if the company's not doing well and you're starting to see a path where you might need to be pulling on that personal guarantee. So again, not taking that type of decision lightly, if you were to go down this path.
So what I'm hearing is I expect to see basketball the next couple of weeks to help manage the stress. Is what I'm hearing.
I, I definitely get out there to release some stress for myself.
Well, thanks, Matt, for coming on. Appreciate it, and yeah, we'll talk to you later. All right, bye.